In this module, we're going to discuss locations. In a previous module, we discussed how players build the board themselves by playing location cards. So here's an example of what the board state could look like in a game. Now, the first thing to say is that there are two types of locations: sites and systems. The sites are oriented horizontally, and the systems are oriented vertically. Characters go to sites and starships go to systems. Another interesting dynamic of Star Wars CCG, though, is that characters, in addition to going to sites, could go to systems aboard starships as pilots or as passengers. And so you have to decide which theater you want to play your characters into. The next thing to note is that the locations are in groups. So all of these are Tatooine locations. You have the planet system, and then you have several sites on that planet. Over here is the Nal Hutta system, which does not have any sites on the table that are related to it. And over here is a Naboo site, which does not have its system location on the table. And so there's no requirement for both the system and related sites to be on the table. You can have just the system, just sites, or you can have both at once. Okay, let's look at a location card in more detail. So here is a site, Tatooine, Jabba's Palace. The first thing to point out is these little blue and red lightsabers in the corners of the card. These are Force icons, and they represent how strong the light and the dark sides of the Force flow through that location. They have a double-edged dynamic which is pretty interesting. If I'm the light side player, and I have two Force icons here, that's good for me. The more Force icons I have, the more Force I can activate on my turn, the more resources I have to use on my turn. On the other hand, the more Force icons I have at a location, the more Force my opponent can make me lose if they control the location. So we'll discuss that in more detail later on in terms of how that works, but for now just keep in mind, Force icons are a double-edged sword. Now you might be wondering, why are there more light side Force icons than dark side Force icons at this location? Isn't Jabba's Palace a bad place, so to speak? Shouldn't the dark side of the Force be stronger here? And the answer is pretty interesting. There is sometimes both a light side and dark side version of a location. This is the light side version, which conceptually probably represents Jabba's palace after Luke and crew went and did their thing and freed Han. There's also a dark side version, which the dark side player may have in their deck, and which you can see here, which has more dark side Force icons than light side icons. And this probably conceptually represents the location before, again, Luke and crew went and scored a victory for the light side of the Force there. So one of the many interesting dynamics in Star Wars CCG is when players both have a version of a location, and they try to replace the opponent's version of a location with their own. In addition to the Force icons, there's of course the game text on the card. There's game text on both sides of a location, which tells each player special things which apply to them at that location. So the game text on this particular site won't be very understandable to you at this point, so we're not going to dwell on it. Finally, there are the other little symbols on the location in the corner here, the twin suns and whatnot. That's more advanced, you don't need to worry about that right now. That will be covered down the road. So we've looked at what's on the location card here, but if you're very observant and you remember the earlier modules, you might be wondering about something that's not on the card. Where is the destiny number? The answer is all locations are destiny 0, according to the rules. And so the destiny number isn't even printed on them. They're just all destiny 0. Okay, let's look at the system. So this is the Tatooine system. Just like the site, it has Force icons, and this is another location which has both the light side and the dark side version. So you can see the dark side version here, it has more dark side icons than light side icons, as opposed to the light side version, which is on the table. in this hypothetical game. So with this location, if you look at the game text, you can actually probably intuit more or less what it means. If you control, for each of your starships here, your total power is +1 in battles at Tatooine sites. And so, conceptually, intuitively, you can understand that if you control that Tatooine system, you're going to get bonuses at the sites. So then the only other thing to look at right now on the system card is this number 7 here. This is called the parsec number. Without getting into astronomy and Star Wars lore, for purposes of Star Wars CCG, a parsec is just a way of representing the system's location within the galaxy. The Tatooine system is at parsec 7, so it is closest to other systems which are also at parsec 7. It's not too far away from systems at parsec 6 or 8, but if you, say, look at the Nal Hutta system, which is also on the table here, at parsec 3, it's not particularly close to Tatooine. Those two systems are a little bit far apart. The relevance of this is that some starships can travel further distances than others. And we'll explain this when we talk about starship movement in a later module, but it's pretty simple. And starships all say on them how many parsecs they can travel at a time. Finally, let's just introduce a key term here. The idea of battleground locations versus non-battleground locations. With very few specific exceptions that don't matter for our purposes right now, the rule is that if the location has both dark side and light side force icons, it is a battleground. If it only has icons on one side of the force, it is a non-battleground. So if you look at the locations on the table here, most of them are battlegrounds. Most of them have both light side and dark side force icons. However, there are two non-battlegrounds on the table. You have Jabba's Palace Dungeon here, and then you have Naboo Boss Nass's Chambers. And it's important to keep this distinction in mind because there are many cards which affect what you can do depending on whether you are at a battleground or at a non-battleground location.